Today is Monday, September 23rd, and this is the ADM Investor Services Weekly Market Kickoff. Please note that the views and opinions expressed here today are solely those of our guests and should not be construed as the views or opinions of ADM Investor Services or ADM. Today's guests are Mark Soderberg, ADMIS Senior Ag Analyst, Alan Bush, Senior Financial Economist, and Mark Bowman, ADMIS Senior Global Market Analyst. Starting with the grain markets this morning, Mark, what's driving the higher trade in the soybean complex this morning?
Well, I think it's largely due to weather and short covering. And by weather, I believe what we're seeing in South America that's really driving the higher trade. Very hot, very dry conditions continue to exist in the central growing regions from Mato Grosso, stretching east into Goiás and Minas Gerais. Good rains have benefited the southern growing regions of the country, and some of those showers have stretched north into Paraná and in southern Mato Grosso do Sul. But the areas to the north, as mentioned before, they're likely to stay very hot and dry into early part of October. Brazilian farmers are expected to increase planted acres of beans this year by about 1%. And the longer that we have to wait for these rains to arrive, I think just adds to the unlikelihood we'll see that, or at minimum push back these plantings, which would push back when the harvest would occur and what to extend the window for U.S. soybeans to dominate in global trade. Speculative traders have also been steady buyers in the bean market here for the past 4 weeks, cutting into their short position. It still rests at about 122,000 contracts last week, but that's well below the record short position of 186,000 about 2 months ago. Spot beans, they've now jumped up to their highest level since early part of August at 1042, and we can get through that level. The next resistance doesn't come in until about the 1086 level.
Let's look at the corn market, Mark. Farmers are hoping we've seen a seasonal low here. What are your thoughts?
I think it's starting to look that way. This delayed in the plantings in South America has an impact on corn as well. The second corn crop harvest goes in after the beans, or second corn crop gets planted after the beans are harvested early next year, and as that gets pushed back, it just extends the U.S. window there as well. Corn has a building demand story with lower production out of Europe this year, Russia and Ukraine. In addition, in Argentina, we're looking at about a 17% reduction in acres down there as more of that crop gets shifted into soybeans. So now if we're looking at a threat here of the Brazilian crop, I think it just adds to the attractiveness of U.S. corn in the global marketplace. So far this year, the low for December corn has been at 385. That was made in late August. And I think that was largely a result of U.S. farmers unloading the rest of last year's inventory, freeing up bin space for this year's harvest. So right now, prices are back above that $4 level, approaching the highs from September. And the next resistance after that I see is at 433. So like the soybeans, speculative traders are still pretty heavily short, about 135,000 contracts, but that's just a fraction of the record short position of 354,000 we saw just about 2 months ago. So U.S. harvest is starting to get going a little bit. I think right now it's about a 50-50 proposition historically, whether we're going to see a higher production out of the USDA in subsequent reports or lower.
Mr. Bowman, let's look at both the cotton and coffee markets. How are this week's rains affecting the cotton crops in the Delta and the Southeast?
Okay, so we had those rains a couple weeks ago that hit Mississippi and Arkansas especially, and they had a lot of bowls open. So this did cut into the crop conditions and raise concerns about the upcoming crop. Now, last week's U.S. crop progress report showed about 54% of the crop had bowls open. This is the total U.S. crop versus an average of 57% for this point in the season. Based on this, we'd expect to see around 64% this week. Only 10% of the crop had been harvested, which is right on average, may reach 13% this week. But as you mentioned, the heavy rains in Delta this week, in the Delta and the Southeast, are expected this week with both a low pressure system in the Delta and then a tropical storm or depression headed into the Gulf, probably reaching landfall in Florida, although it's a bit early to tell. Delta and Southeast had some warm and dry weather over the weekend, which may have allowed active harvest in those areas. But here's the rub. Georgia had 57% bowls open last week versus 63% on average. Maybe that number jumps to 69% this week. And harvest had not begun as of last week. So I don't know if we can see more than 1% to 2% this week. Likewise, Mississippi was 79% open last week versus 73% average. That, if we move along at typical pace, we could be 89 to 91% this week open. Last week, there were only 2% harvested. Maybe we could reach 10 to 15% today. And Arkansas was 92% open last week versus 85% average. Looks like we could reach almost the 95 to 98% today. The harvest last week was 3% complete, which was minimal, but still the highest since 2019. We could be 8 to 10% complete today. So the bottom line is a good portion of the crop still has bowls open and probably a good portion unharvested. And we could see some damage if these rains come as expected.
Mark, moving south down into South America, how's the Brazil coffee crop setting up for 2025?
Okay, so they, of course, Mark mentioned how dry it's been, and this did affect, it's been dry there for months, and this did affect the current crop that's just finishing harvesting. We're getting ready for 2025, and we need the rains to really kind of start the ball rolling to get the flowering season going. The trees, though, the dryness has also left the trees stressed. So even if the rains do come on time, they may lack the energy to produce a really strong crop. Southern part of the main producing region of Minas Gerais may have received some rain over the weekend, but the northern parts did not. And it doesn't look like they could get any substantial rain until next month. So this could keep the market elevated for a while until those rains finally come.
Thanks, Mark. Alan, stock indexes sitting near record highs. How do you think the indexes will perform now heading into the election with some 5-6 weeks left?
Okay, well, stock index futures have recently performed much better than the news would suggest. We've seen quite a few economic reports coming in on the weak side, and yet stock index futures can continue to hold firm and even record highs now lately in the S&P and the Dow. However, the upside, I think, may be limited as we get closer to the November election, since it is likely that traders will enter into an evening up mode due to the uncertainties surrounding the election. So I'm just turning neutral now on stock index futures in advance of the election. We'll see how that goes. But good performance as of late, but I think a lot of uncertainty may cap the upside, at least over the near term.
And Alan, outside of the stocks, which of the financial markets do you feel have the most upside potential?
Well, I think the market that has the most upside potential is the interest rate futures markets, but mainly at the short end of the curve. That would be 2-year notes, 5-year notes, even shorter if you go to the Fed funds futures or SOFR futures. So I would stay with futures at the short end. The bonds have somewhat of a inflation risk, and they may underperform, but I think the entire curve is likely to head higher as far as the futures, but stick mainly to futures at the short end. That's where the most benefits are as far as the Fed policy turning more aggressive to accommodative policies.
Last question, Alan. The gold silver spread keeps widening. The gold gaining on the silver, definitely outperforming the silver. Will gold continue to gain on the silver, do you think?
I think it will as the Fed continues to ease credit. Now, easier credit conditions are also supportive to silver, but one problem with silver, a weakening economy tends to highlight silver's industrial component, which I think is likely to be a limiting factor. So gold, I think, will continue to gain on silver. I believe they're both likely to trend higher, but I think gold will far outperform what the silver can do on the upside.
Thanks, guys. Remember, the views and opinions expressed today in this video are solely those of our guests and should not be construed as the views or opinions of ADM Investor Services or ADM. If you'd like more information about our brokerage services, like to speak to one of our experts about managing your risks, or would like to open a trading account, please visit www.admis.com.